Howdy. Howdy.
All right, great to be here with you. I'm John Sherman, class of 92. I am Dean of the Bush, wow, that microphone kicked on. I'm Dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service, and it is my honor to welcome you to a very special event here this evening, sponsored by the Mosbacher Institute. We're going to be talking about energy in Texas, and before I get to the speakers here, as a kid who grew up in South Texas and worked as a roustabout during my summers in Jackson County, energy has always been predominant in my family. And also growing up not far from the Bay City nuclear plant where my brother-in-law worked for years, it has been on our minds a lot. And it's so important to the future of this state, as well as our past and our present, but where we're going as a state. I want to welcome some special guests and sponsors here. From Google, we have Amy Murphy, class of 12 from the Bush School. She's not here tonight, but she's been instrumental in this. But we do have her colleague, Mr. Doug Lewin. Now, I'm not going to say he went to another school up the road that wears orange and white, but Doug, we welcome all kinds here. So, Giga Maggies, and in all seriousness, it's great to have you here. We also have Representative Paul Dyson, class of 02. Paul, you're in here somewhere. He's our local state representative. He's a political science alum, so Representative, you are a Bush School grad now, too, now that political science is part of us. We have Chairman Thomas Gleason, class of 06. He's an MPSA alum out of the Bush School. He's chairman of the Public Utility Commission of Texas. We've got so many supporters and friends of Texas A&M and the Bush School, it would take me too long to name everybody. You know who you are. We can't do what we do without you. And I want to welcome the guests from our community, our students, our former students. This is what makes the Bush School special, to have you all here for the great talks we have tonight. And so we're now going to welcome up folks who almost don't need introductions, but tonight up on the stage we're going to have Congressman Bill Flores, fighting Texas Aggie class of 76. He was in the Corps of Cadets. This is a special class, by the way, with the sesquicentennial coming up. And also Dr. Raymond Robertson, who is the director of the Mosbacher Institute. So with that, let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Howdy. Howdy. Thank you very much, Dean Sherman. It's always a pleasure to have you open these events for us. It gives us a certain amount of gravitas, and we really appreciate your remarks and your warm welcome to our very special guests. It's really, really a pleasure for me to be here tonight. I'm very excited about this event for a number of reasons. One is I get to have the chance to introduce and have a discussion with Bill Flores, who I will say is one of our hometown heroes. I hope I'm not exaggerating when I say that, but he's been really amazing in so many ways. For those of you who don't know, I think there might be two of you in the back. Bill is a business leader, a corporate governance expert, a public policy advocate, and a frequent speaker on energy, economics, leadership, and public service. From 2011 to 2021, he served as the U.S. representative for Texas's 17th Congressional District right here, where he played a key role on the House Energy and Commerce, Budget, and Veterans Affairs and Natural Resources Committees. During his tenure, he was widely regarded as a thought leader in shaping national energy policy, which is another reason we're so excited that he's here tonight. Prior to his congressional service, Representative Flores spent over 2 decades in senior executive and board leadership roles across both public and private enterprises. His private sector career was focused on job creation, economic growth, and delivering long-term value to a broad range of stakeholders, including public company shareholders, private equity firms, and institutional investors such as pension and retirement funds. He currently serves as the chair of the board of the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. He's also the chair of the board of Nauticus Robotics, Inc., the director of the CO2 Energy Transition Corporation, and member of the Strategic Advisory Board for Veriton LLC. He also serves on governance positions for several nonprofit organizations, including the Houston Christian University, the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, and the Private Enterprise Research Center at Texas A&M. I think we have faculty from there here tonight. He's a licensed CPA in Texas, and he holds a BBA in accounting from Texas A&M University. Thank you. And an MBA from Houston Christian University. He and his wife, Gina, have 2 adult sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 4 awesome grandkids. Outside of his professional pursuits, he's passionate about flying and snow skiing. So I hope you will please join me in giving me a hometown welcome to Representative Bill Flores. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Well, howdy, everybody. So it's great to be here. The last time I was at this podium, I think, was the night after the election in 2018. And as a Republican, I wasn't very happy about the outcome. I won, but it didn't. Some of my colleagues did. Anyway, it's great to have my wife here. And she leaned over to me when Raymond going through the introduction, said, "You ain't that big a deal." So anyway, it's great to be here. If we can cue up my presentation, I think. And it's great to have Thomas Gleason here with me. Thomas, where are you?
I'm back here.
Oh, back here. What are you
Howdy,
doing
Bill.
in the back row? So anyway,
Came in late.
Thomas and I are the only two Aggies on the ERCOT board, so we're 2 of 12, but we're doing our best to keep everybody in line. Let's go into our presentation here. Let me start. This is what we're going to talk about, but let's just talk about it. Okay, let me start with a disclaimer. Since Thomas is here, we've got so many other policymakers here. Paul Dyson's here. The views I'm expressing today are my own. And so to the extent that they conflict with them, I mean, the policymakers are the bosses, and then Thomas ultimately has the final say. But I just want to share with you where I stand in terms of the challenges and opportunities for power in Texas. First of all, we need to give you a few definitions. I'm going to try to, this is a non-technical, we're not going to talk about watts, amps, and volts and all that crap. But anyway, I wanted to try to give you a few things to think about as I'm going through the conversation. The ERCOT grid, what is the ERCOT grid? Okay, that is the system of generators and transmission and distribution lines and loads that are part of the ERCOT footprint in Texas. It's about 75% of the land mass of Texas, the land footprint of Texas, 90% of the consumers in Texas. We'll go through that more in a minute. The next is, what is an independent system operator or an RTO? It's basically an independent organization that is supposed to make sure that all of the loads and generation, all the electrical resources and loads are balanced in a particular region. In Texas, that's ERCOT that does that. What's a dispatchable resource? You're going to hear me use the word dispatchable and intermittent. Dispatchable resource is like your car. You go, you push the button, and you push on the accelerator and it goes, you push on the brake and it stops, and then you hit the button and it turns off. It's something you can turn on and off. You control the dispatchable generation. On the other hand, intermittent generation is something that relies on something else. And so you can think wind and solar typically rely on weather. It relies on atmospheric conditions to produce power. A grid disturbance is something external that hits the grid, that, like the loss of a transmission line, a bird landing on a line that causes it to short out, or lightning or something like that, or a load that drops off, or a generator drops off. So you have grid disturbances. And then how do you handle them? You handle them with ride-through. What is the ability of something on the grid to be able to ride through that hiccup, through that disturbance? So we'll go through that again very quickly. What are some facts about ERCOT? What is ERCOT? First of all, it's the first ISO, independent system operator in the country. It started in 1970 in response to the big blackout in the Northeast, when new reliability standards were imposed on grid operators. And so the electric power companies in Texas got together and formed ERCOT. It's since become independent from that. Now today, the ERCOT market is about a $20 billion market. The ERCOT market, measured by peak demand of electricity, is the third largest grid in the country. All within the boundaries of one state, but it's the third largest grid in the country. Last year, to give you an idea of the amount of capital being invested, last year it approved $14 billion in transmission projects. It's got almost 1,500 generation units, and it's got just under 2,000 market participants. A market participant is somebody that sells retail electricity or a wholesale electricity, a generator, a transmission company, a distribution company. Those are the market participants that it has. In terms of summer installed capacity, you can see it's about 38% natural gas, about 22% wind, 8% coal, about 19% solar. Now, we don't separately disclose batteries here because batteries are both a load and a resource. I'm not going to go into how the power was used last year. Let's talk about the mission, vision, and values. The vision is of ERCOT, and these are brand new mission, vision, and values, is to be the world's most reliable and innovative grid. I think we already are. If you look at what's happening in Texas today in terms of load growth, population growth, the data centers that are coming here, the technology business, the industrial growth, we are having to do things that nobody else is yet doing in order to make sure that you keep it powered. The mission is to ensure reliable grid with competitive and cost-efficient electricity markets, and it carries out those core functions by ensuring open transmission or open access to the transmission and distribution systems, reliability and adequacy of the grid, and customer retail choice, and also an accurate accounting for energy. ERCOT is the counterparty for all wholesale electricity transactions in Texas. Do you think $20 billion per year, divide that by 365, you get an idea of the amount of cash that flows through ERCOT every day. It has core values that line up pretty well with the Texas Aggie core values. I'm not going to go through those because we got to get into the fun stuff. What is ERCOT 4.0? Or what is the evolution of ERCOT? When it was originally founded in 1970, it was meant to be the balancing agency that started the company. And then in 2.0 in the 90s, customer choice was introduced in Texas. At that point in time, the system was set up as a zonal system. I'm not going to get into the details on that because it's over my head. ERCOT 3.0 we made the transition to ERCOT 3.0 in about 2010 when we went to a nodal market. And then you had this huge explosion in renewables growth, and that's when the Texas legislature jumped in and set up the CRIS transmission system, which turned out to be fabulously successful, which is a model that many other states could and should follow. Now we've moved into ERCOT 4.0, and that's what you're seeing there is an evolving and decentralizing resource mix. In ERCOT's 1.0 and 2.0, you basically had a generator, which was a big coal plant or a nuclear plant or a series of natural gas plants. You had the transmission companies, the distribution companies, and you had your loads. But today, you've got 1,500 different generators: wind, solar, batteries, nuclear, coal, natural gas, rooftop solar, and a variety of other things that we'll go to in more time. So if you think about how much more complicated the grid's gotten, how do you manage that? And so that's the transition we made to ERCOT 4.0. Here are some records. The peak demand for ERCOT was 86 gigawatts. And what does 86 gigawatts mean to you? Well, we'll go through that in a minute. Well, a gigawatt is enough to produce the power for power 250,000 homes. So I think Bryan College Station would consume about a gigawatt of electricity on a peak day. So that was the average power consumed on that day in August of 2023. Now that was a hot summer. The following weekend, which normally on the weekends you expect lower demand, was about 85.1 gigawatts. So it's huge. Now, our summer capacity for this upcoming summer, we're expecting peak demand could be as high as 94 gigawatts, and we've got about 105 gigawatts of total generation capacity. Some other interesting things about Texas, it's got 41 megawatts of wind capability, 41 gigawatts of wind capability, 30, which is number one in the country, 38 gigawatts of solar capacity, which is number one in the country, and about 19 gigawatts of battery storage, which puts Texas number one. We surpassed California a few months ago in terms of battery storage. Let's continue with the fun stuff. If you see the peak demand in that box of 86 gigawatts, that was in the summer of '83. Since then, we haven't exceeded that peak. But what's interesting is the total amount of energy usage year over year in terms of year over year growth. So from 2021 to 2025, the Texas energy growth grew by 5.6%. This year, it could grow by more than 10% over that. So there's a difference between peak energy, which is the peak amount of current that's being used on a particular time, versus the amount of energy that's being used on an annual basis. So the annual growth in Texas is about 2x what's happening in the rest of the country, and it's accelerating. And we'll go into that in more detail in a second. But I start a lot of speeches by saying, we're blessed to live in Texas because we're a fast-growing state. We've got great people, we've got great resources, have a can-do public policy through the legislature and the governor and the PUC that helps make all this stuff happen. But also, we're challenged in Texas because we have that same high growth profile to move forward. Here is our load forecast. Don't pay attention to the gray bars, pay attention to the turquoise bars, if you would. This is what we're expecting in terms of load growth between 2025 and 2031. So if you look at this year, we're looking at 87 gigawatts of total load. 2031, just 5 years from now, we're looking at 145. 67% growth. That's like taking California's load and dropping it into Texas. Think about that. And so that's what makes it being on the board at ERCOT so much fun and so much of a challenge, is we've got to figure out, how do you meet all that demand growth? Well, this is part of the way we meet it. This is the generation interconnect queue. This is the people that have applied to ERCOT to be able to connect to the grid and to produce power to satisfy the needs of the state. There are 2,000 active interconnection requests on the generation side in Texas. Let me go back to this for a minute. One of the things that's interesting about this load forecast, in December of 2024, there were large load interconnect requests of about 50 gigawatts, slightly over 50 gigawatts. As of now, that's north of 240 gigawatts. 15 months later, everybody wants to come to Texas. They want to come and they want to connect to the grid. And it's because of the great state that we have, the great policy environment, the great people, the great universities that we have, and the can-do spirit that we have in the state. But it just shows you, just think about that, a 4x growth in large load interconnect. Think data centers, oil and gas operations, think industrial plants, things like that. I was a speaker last night in Houston, and the number 2 guy at CenterPoint was talking about, it took 100 years to build Houston's grid to be able to accommodate 20 gigawatts of load. And in the next 5 years, they're going to add 50% to that. It's the same story for Texas. Think about that. 100 years to get to produce to be able to satisfy an 87 gigawatt load, and in 5 years, you're going to add 67% of that. So let's go to this. Now, let me go back to this one again. I'm jumping around a little bit. If you look at this section right here, this is a dispatchable resource. These are intermittent resources. This is both a load and a resource, but it is dispatchable. So when we have our eclipse every night, when the sun goes down and the solar drops to 0, the batteries kick in and help us meet those peaks on these hot summer days between 6 and 9 at night. In the wintertime, they're usually there in the morning to help us out, and they're there in the evening to help us out, but they're only good for a couple of hours. So this is the dispatchable resource, the good long-term dispatchable resource you need. But look at the investment in this versus the investment in these two. That's a challenge. Now, why do I bring that up? Not all gigawatts, megawatts, watts, whatever you want to call them, are created equal. So if you look at the power, so I'm going to assume a typical 100 megawatt example. So it would to power Bryan College Station on a hot summer day takes about 400 megawatts. Okay, so about 4 times this. So on modular nuclear plant in the summer has 94% capacity, has 98% capacity in the wintertime, and up to the 100, it can power 23,600 homes in the wintertime, in the summertime, in the wintertime, 24,500. Now, if you go down the stack, a gas turbine, which is dispatchable, can power about 21,000 homes in the summer and about 22,000 in the winter. Go to wind, you got 22% capacity in the, or put it in terms of homes, 5,500 homes in the summertime, 7,000 in wintertime. Solar in the summertime, 19,000 homes, in the winter, 4,250 homes. Energy storage, about 37% capacity in the summertime, 9,200 homes, 7,500. So what do you want on the grid? You want everything on the grid, but if you're the grid operator, if you're ERCOT, you've got to make sure that you balance the intermittent resources with enough capacity of dispatchable resources to make everything come together. Because electricity is something the supply and the demand have to equal second by second. So you can't have a time where, oh, we're short a few megawatts here. It's okay. It's not okay. So that's when you start to have grid disturbances. And you don't want that here. None of us want it. We expect what is called 5 nines reliability. 99.99% of the time, the power is on. We've gotten so used to that. So is that clear as mud for everybody? The differences between the capacity of intermittent megawatts versus dispatchable megawatts? Okay, good. This is where it all comes together. This is my favorite chart. I have finally mandated that this is going to be presented to the ERCOT board every time. This takes all the load interconnection. It takes our current load and our current generation that we have in the system today, and then it adds in all of the load forecast, and it also adds in all of the generation additions forecast. And so what you want is, this is the load forecast right here. Now, this doesn't look that pronounced, but that's actually a 67% growth between there and right here. It also adds in all of the expected capacity coming from dispatchable resources here. Then it adds batteries, which are dispatchable. Then it adds wind and solar. So when you first look at this slide, it looks like, oh, we got lots of room here between here and up here. But what you think about is you've got to meet that demand every second. And in order to do that, you need to have dispatchable resources that exceed your demand. This is the one that was keeping me awake at night back in this time period before we had a lot of battery storage. When I joined the board post-Uri, there were several times when we were short on reserves because we just didn't have enough dispatchable resources, and you can't always count on the wind and solar to be there, particularly when the sun's going down at night and the wind hadn't started coming up in West Texas yet. So it made life kind of fun for a while. We look like we're okay here. That's not really the reserve margin that I would like to have. I'd like to have a little bit more gap there. The challenge with all these numbers here, this editorial comment, is it's hard to predict what's real, because 77% of that new load that I was telling you about is data centers. Are they going to show up? I mean, is that capital actually going to be invested? Because you're having to design the grid to be able to meet that expected load, and you're hoping that the generation will be there as well. And so you've got this fine balance. Are people going to invest the capital in the generation? Are the data centers really going to show up on the load side? So assuming that all this comes together, it looks like in Texas we need to rewire the state. And so we have come up with, oops, I'm off a slide here, excuse me. I'm sorry. Oh, never mind, okay. So this is how we were meeting the challenge. I'm going to get into the rewiring state here in just a minute. We have done several things at the ERCOT board and with PUC support and policymaker support. The ERCOT recently adopted what's called real-time co-optimization plus batteries. I'm not going to go into that. It's just a more efficient way to match all the resources that are available to produce electrons for the state, along with the expected demand on a minute-by-minute basis in the state. It also is a new product that is set up called Dispatchable Reliability Reserve Service, DRRS. I'm not going to go into that today. It's something that the legislature asked ERCOT to look at. The PUC and ERCOT are working together to try to design this new tool. Hopefully, it is going to help cause people to invest more capital in dispatchable generation resources in the future. We also have a program called ADER, Aggregate Distributed Energy Resources. I like to have fun with this one because we had this little company called Tesla that came to us back in the fall of 2022. And they said, look, we've been trying to mess with California for 3 years to try to set up a program so that people that are part of the Tesla system, if you have a Tesla roof, Tesla Powerwall, Tesla car, Tesla had future-proofed their system, so they knew the state of charge for everything. They knew how much in the aggregate all their systems were producing. They said, you know, we could set that up. If you'll set up a program where the consumers can sell their excess power to the state, control their energy usage, you can have what we call a virtual power plant. And it could be substantial. We said, sure, that makes sense. So we set up the phase 1 of a pilot program for ADERs, for virtual power plants. And we did it in the course of about 3 months. And then now we're on phase 3 of that program, which I find to be very innovative. And they came to us in Texas because we could move fast and get it done. And I think Raymond may have some questions about Texas versus the rest of the world later on, and we'll talk more about that in the future. Also, looking into the future, ERCOT has something called GRIT, the Grid Research and Innovation and Transformation Project. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail right now, but we're always trying to find new ways to manage the grid more efficiently and to take this ever-changing mix of loads and ever-changing mix of generation and make it work together seamlessly at the lowest and most affordable price for consumers. Now, one of the things we talk about, if you talk about huge growth in generation and a huge growth in loads, you got to have a couple of new extension cords to tie it all together. And so actually late last year, in 2 different phases, ERCOT endorsed the 765 kV project. So the largest transmission line you'll see today is about 350,000 volts. And the capacity of moving, if you can build a system based on 765,000 volts, you have a lot more capacity. It's a huge extension cord. And if you wire the state that way with this new electron superhighway, you can basically drop load anywhere you want to, drop a new generation resource anywhere you want to, within reason. I mean, you got physics still controlled here, but within reason. And so it gives the state so much more flexibility in terms and future-proofs the state for the next century in order to be able to meet the growth profile of the state, both on the load side, the generation side, and who knows what the population is going to be. So I'm really excited about this. Hopefully Raymond will ask me a question about that because there are some interesting things that have popped up in that regard. The Texas Energy Fund, at the legislature before last, the legislature passed the Texas Energy Fund to try to induce more capital to be invested in dispatchable natural gas resources. So far, that's coming along pretty successfully. It provided for bonuses for early completion of natural gas generation plants because we needed more dispatchable generation at the time, still do. And it also provided subsidized loans to help encourage that. So we're going to have 7 to 8 gigawatts of new capacity coming online. The first few are already online now. We should have more by the end of 2027. ERCOT and the PUC have been working together pretty quickly to get this done. The next thing that the state has done to meet the challenge It set up the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Office, which was established by House Bill 14 in the last legislative session. The executive director's been hired. They have $2 billion allocated, they've got $350 million allocated to try to help Texas have all the components that it needs to be dominant in nuclear in the areas that it can control. The federal government controls fuel, it controls waste, and it controls licensing. Texas wants to be able to have some influence on building an incubator so that we lead in all the other parts of nuclear energy. So the first funds have already been allocated. It's being invested, and hopefully if the federal government moves a little more quickly, we can have some dispatchable nuclear power, both conventional nuclear, which think big nuclear like Vogtle in Georgia, or think small modular, next generation. Now these are my ideas in terms of looking forward. What are the solutions to power Texas in the future? Not only for the next 5 years, but for the next 50 years. So the extreme growth creates challenges, but I think it's created opportunities because to the extent you have load wanting to come here, hopefully you're going to have the capital that wants to follow that will invest in generation. The data center demand presents challenges for future resource solutions. I mean, some of these data centers have more load. It's like taking the city of Waco and putting it on a few acres in Abilene. Think about that. So, and do it, just keep multiplying that over and over again across the state. The future resource opportunities that we have need to include more dispatchable resource generation. Nuclear, geothermal, I think is going to be a bright spot. Think clean, dispatchable energy that comes from the technology we know best, oil and gas drilling, and hydraulic fracturing, and long lateral, long offset drilling. This is an area where I'm really excited. Fuel cells, I think fuel cells are pretty cool. I mean, particularly if you can put them behind the meter at a data center. They burn natural gas more clean, or they have lower emissions than a natural gas, typical natural gas compressor, or turbine. So they really are a thing to look at in the future. There's some characteristics about them where you might got to match them up with batteries, capacitors, things like that. Natural gas generation has got to be part of the picture because it is a great, you can get it quickly, and then you can turn it on and off as you need to. We've got some large load solutions. Demand response. So if, for instance, crypto miners, a lot of people complain about crypto miners. I view crypto miners as a big shock absorber. When you have a bunch of excess electrons coming from wind and solar, they're using that and kind of have a base load demand for those electrons to help stabilize the market. But then when the market gets tight, they drop offline. They're price sensitive. The data centers, I mean, if you look at what Senate Bill 6 has said, data centers are going to have to be able to do some of that same flexibility. I think when I look forward, most of these data centers are bringing their own power. I mean, at first everybody wanted to connect to the grid, but there just wasn't the ability to get everybody connected as quickly as we'd wanted to. If you look at that interconnect queue I talked to you about on the load side, that was bogging down. And so the data centers are bringing their own power. I think in 2 to 4 years, so they power themselves for a while, for a couple of years. And I think after that, when they can connect to the grid, they're going to have a resource that can be contributed to the grid beyond that. I think large loads need to be good grid citizens. When I started giving speeches to the crypto mining community about 4 years ago, I told them, be good grid citizens. When times get tight, drop off. And I said, fortunately, because the way the pricing works on your business, it's a good time to drop off. When electricity prices are high, your profits go down, so drop off. I should have trademarked that term, good grid citizens, because when I was at a Google event in Midlothian back in December, the CEO of Google, when he announced $40 billion of new data centers in Texas, said, we want to be good grid citizens. And I thought, shoot. And what did he mean by that? He said, first of all, we're going to be flexible in the way we use power from the grid. Secondly, we're going to bring our own power, and we want to produce for every megawatt we use, we'll have 1.1 megawatts available for the grid if needed. And so I thought that's what we need. And so I think most of the large responsible data center, the hyperscalers, get that. They want to be good grid citizens. So in Senate Bill 6, that's sort of been codified. They're going to need to be good grid citizens moving forward. I think the ADER program, the virtual power plants that I talked about, is going to be a great opportunity. Look, the house that Gina and I have is the largest producer of solar power in Brazos County. And I think that I'd love to be able to be in a situation where I could determine, okay, turn all the stuff off, turn air conditioners off, and produce the power and get a high retail rate when times are tight. We can't do that in BTU because it's a muni, but if I was with CenterPoint, I could. And so I see opportunity for that, for you to be able to control, you to be able to be essentially a generator through the virtual power plant program, through the ADER program. I think that's something to do in the future. Conservation's got to be part of the picture. If you think about it, the cheapest electron is the one you don't use. So if we can get large users and consumers, when we say the grid's getting tight, that you begin to reduce your power demand. And we've had really good luck with that. You know, we put out notices when the grid's going to be tight on hot summer days or on cold winter days, and the public's been pretty good. Now, some people grumble, like, don't touch my blankety-blank thermostat and stuff like that. We're asking you to do it voluntarily, but I think that's something. And then one of the solutions is going to be to rewire the state, to basically build that 765 kVA system I was talking about to produce power, to be able to get power from wherever you want it to wherever it's needed, or from wherever you can get it on the system, wherever it's needed. And then AI, I think, is a solution. There's a question mark beside that. What can we do with AI? I don't know, but I do know that it is going to be both part of the challenge because the AI data centers are huge when it comes to load, but AI may help us be able to manage the grid better. I know we've got an initiative at ERCOT to be able to find new ways to use AI to help manage the grid, but to do it in a way where you don't have a hiccup because you want 5 nines reliability, as I talked about before. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Anyway, I am not an electrical engineer, and I hope I didn't try to portray myself as an electrical engineer today. But I want to close with this before we go into the questions, and that is, at the end of the day, if you're a consumer or you're a generator or you're a participant in the grid or you're a policymaker, the laws of physics are going to control what happens when it comes to the grid. And then secondly, the laws of economics are going to have something to say as well. So I remember when I was in Congress as a policymaker, and I'm a reform policymaker now, as a member of Congress, people come up and say there ought to be a law. And I said there are laws. There are the laws of physics, the laws of economics, and they're going to trump the laws of policymakers every day of the week. So a lot of policymakers come up with dreams about ways to do things, but the laws of physics and the laws of economics are going to control at the end of the day. So I hope this was helpful. Raymond, let's do it. Which one did we sit in?
You can choose.
I get to pick one? This is my best side.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those remarks. There's a couple things I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, if you don't mind. Number one, obviously at the Bush School, we believe public service is a noble calling, and I think we'd be very remiss if we didn't just start out by acknowledging your public service and that we really, really appreciate everything you've done for our country and our state. So thank you very much. It means a lot.
Thank you.
I mean, been one of my heroes, but I don't want to get into that for a long time.
If I can brag for a minute, the federal research dollars when I started Congress for A&M were about $600 million, and I helped get it right over $1 billion right once I punched out. So
exactly.
So,
and we appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's great. You did suggest a couple of the questions that you'd like me to follow up on. If
There
we
you
could
go.
just start by talking about how...
That's a great moderator.
It's very easy. Texas is such a great state, and it's really independent, and it has that the independence of ERCOT, right?
Mm-hmm.
That brings in some flexibility, but also some vulnerabilities for the state. Can you talk a little bit about how our model is so special, but what some of the risks might be as well?
Well, let me give you a great example. If following Winter Storm Uri, ERCOT did a self-assessment to determine what went wrong, and it found, I think, 88 areas where there were problems that happened, and it came up with 88 solutions, and it had put those mitigation in place for those 88 solutions before FERC came out with their report about what happened in Texas. So would you rather have somebody in Washington controlling or somebody somewhere else controlling what happens in the state? I mean, the story about California is a great one. I mean, Tesla had been messing with California for 3 years to try to get the ADR program in place. Mm-hmm. We had it implemented in less than 6 months. When I say we, all the hardworking people at ERCOT, I'm just a board member, so I'm a governance person. They don't let me touch the switches. So, but anyway, so that sets it up. The other thing too is, I mean, people talk about when you have an extreme weather event that, well, we could be borrowing electrons from somewhere else. If you look at Winter Storm Uri, that was a huge southeast system. There were no electrons to get from anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And so we just have more flexibility by being able to control our own destiny. If we were part of a larger ISO, independent system operator, if we were like PJM or MISO, the other two big, the first and second largest ISOs, you've got to go to multiple states to get multiple PUCs to be able to sign off on policy changes and things like that. Look, Thomas and I sit side by side at the board meetings, and so he's got 2 members of the PUC that are on the ERCOT board, and the ERCOT management presents something to the ERCOT board. We grind through it. We decide yes, no, how are we going to do it? We've got a great stakeholder process where all the stakeholders in the state get together and say, this is the way to make these policies work, or these are the policies we think we need. And from start to end, we can have it through the technical advisory committee, the stakeholder process, through the ERCOT board, and through the PUC in months. If you try to do that in another ISO, you're talking years. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a lot easier. And plus, like if you're in ISO New England, which covers from basically Connecticut north up to Maine, you've got different state governments that have different ideas on what your generation mix ought to be. Mm-hmm. And so we can do that all right here, right within the boundaries of this state. So we can just move much more quickly.
So this seems obvious, but the AI attraction to the state has been tremendous, and actually we're attracting more, I think, than most other states in the country. How do you think the ERCOT policies and these innovations have a big role to play in that, or?
Well, I don't know. I think one of the things I hear from the data center community is they like Texas because we can move so much more quickly than anybody else can. Mm-hmm. If you want to get, up until recently, up until like December of 2024, when the load interconnection queue was at a more manageable size, and we're fixing that, by the way, but it was at a more manageable size, they could come in and get interconnected in a relatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking about large loads defined as 75 megawatts or more, they'd go to somewhere else, and it would take a lot longer than that. And so one of the things I learned last night when I was at a UK event for CERAWeek is that a lot of these new loads are coming in at 70 megawatts, so they're below the large load threshold, and they can be interconnected in about 3 months. Yeah. And you just can't do that anywhere else. Mm-hmm.
One of the things you did mention that you hoped I asked about, so I want to make sure that I did, was on the transmission on the 765. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, it's a new thing. It's like building the interstate highway system again. And if you think about what happened when the interstate highway system was built, you had a lot of people said, well, we don't want that in our backyard. And so we're having kind of a NIMBY challenge that are starting to come up because these things, this system, the towers are bigger, and they take about a 200-foot right-of-way, but the power capacity that you can get through that line is more than it takes 345 kV lines to do that, which is about a 450-foot right-of-way. So this is really, in terms of land use and eminent domain, it's a smaller footprint.
Excellent.
And it gives so much more capacity for the state and the economic opportunity state. And it kind of rewires the state for the next 50 to 100 years. It took 100 years to get where we are. We're having to do this in a hurry to rewire the state for the future. So it's just a much more flexible system.
And it relaxes a lot of the constraints on both supply and demand at the same time. Transmission is playing a very key
Exactly.
role.
It gives you a lot more flexibility. I mean,
Yep.
basically it's like that outlet strip over there. You can kind of plug in wherever you want to, or put your generator wherever you want to. And now within reason. Again, the laws of physics are going to control this at the end of the day. But I heard a new term. You've heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Well,
Yeah.
I've got a new term. I've heard a new term on this, and that's nope, not on planet Earth. So, anyway.
Well,
some others?
speaking of nope, I mean, I didn't want that to be my transition, but speaking of nope, I wanted to let you know that I share your enthusiasm for nuclear power.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to congratulate you and ERCOT for everything you've been doing to really initiate that and get that moving. But there's only 2 functional small modular reactors in the world right now. I mean, we're building one on Texas A&M. So can you just talk a little bit about your outlook, about how the realistic outlook of the role the nuclear is going to be playing in the grid in the future?
Well, I wish, I mean, if they had like a little 50 kW small modular reactor, I'd bury it in my backyard and I'd be powered for life.
Yep.
Well, I don't have that much left, but anyway, but it's just, I'm so excited about it because it's clean, it's dispatchable. The next generation nuclear is so much more safe than any prior versions of nuclear. Even in terms of big nuclear, like the AP1000s that were just finished at Vogtle in Georgia. I've been there. They're inherently more safe than the other mega nuclear projects. I'm very excited about nuclear, but I see challenges in the future. One is the federal government still doesn't have the licensing right. I think President Trump has done some great things by trying to prod the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to look at things differently, like ALARA, the allowable, what does ALARA stand for? I can't remember what it stands for, but the radiation exposure limitations, they need to relook at that. You get more radiation standing out in the sun next to Vogtle than you get from Vogtle. Yeah, I mean, if you'd been standing next to Fukushima, you'd gotten more radiation from the sun than you would have gotten from what happened there. Same with 3 Mile Island. And so we need to start to having a lot more pragmatic look at what the exposure is, the risk from radiation. It's really scary because you can't see it, you can't smell it or anything like that. So we need to look at ALARA. We need to look at the fuel cycle, particularly with small modular reactors. If you go out and buy a Corvette, you're going to have high-grade gasoline. This is the same thing with small modular reactors or next-gen reactors because they require a higher level of enrichment for uranium. We don't have that capability in this country. We do in the military, but we don't for commercial use. And so where are we having to get it? Russia. To me, that dog doesn't hunt very well. And so we need to be able to. But if you want to be in the HALEU, the high assay, low enriched uranium space, you've got to make sure you got a market for it. If you want to invest in small modular reactors, you need to make sure you're going to have the gasoline to run. So we've got this chicken and egg, and I remember in the energy bill from 2016, it has my HALEU provisions in it. It's taken the federal government. It's just now getting started in that area, but I'm not sure that anybody's really investing money so that we have the fuel. So I have fuel concerns. I have the licensing concerns I talked about, and we still haven't solved the waste problem. What do you do with this stuff when it's done? The good thing about small modular reactors is the fuel has exhausted more of its energy. You have less energy, less radiation in it when it's used. than you do with conventional uranium that we have today. So those again, the federal government needs to move on licensing, the fuel supply, and also on the waste.
So are there any recommendations you'd have even for this group? Because I know public sentiment was also a barrier 10 years ago, and that's been improving. Is there something we could write to Congress or senators and kind of express support? But would you recommend that? Or
There ought to, yeah. So well, let me say, I don't know that. I think Congress, on a bipartisan basis, and I think the president, I think everybody's pretty aligned on nuclear today in this country. The only people that haven't really quite gotten the memo are the folks at the NRC. They're not moving as fast as I would like them to move. I do know that we got a construction license for a small modular reactor a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
So hopefully that's the start of many more. They're going to come out pretty quickly. Look, when Vogtle 3 and 4 were built, the two new AP 1000 units in Georgia, we should have built 5, 6, and 7 somewhere else so that you retain the institutional memory of how it is to build them, and you don't lose the welding skills and the workforce and all that stuff. I'm not a big believer in industrial policy at the federal level, but in this case, I think I'd like to see an industrial policy that says, the United States of America is going to lead in nuclear. We're going to have, 40% of our baseload power is going to be produced by nuclear. You name the number. And then set up the industrial policy to do it. The state of Texas is doing it through all the other elements: workforce, education, land, licensing, not licensing, but regulation and so forth. So the state's leading in that, but it can't handle the licensing and the regulatory structure, or the licensing, the waste and the fuel. So hopefully we'll all work together on that pretty soon. I'd love to see nuclear everywhere.
yeah, I'm with
And
you.
geothermal, I'm excited about geothermal too. And the rocks in Texas aren't as hot, but the folks at Fervo tell me that, at Fervo Geothermal tell me, we're coming to Texas eventually. And I mean, they're all Texans, and they're the guy that runs it's Aggie, so I mean, he ought to be here pretty quick.
We had an afternoon mini conference in which we talked a lot about some of these issues. We had some academics and practitioners come in. One of the issues that came up very strongly, actually from Professor Akavu, was the importance of national security, and energy security is national security. And I know you've thought a lot about this as well. Can you just define what you would mean by energy security?
If you go back to the sort of underpinnings of what are the basic economic inputs, or what are the inputs into a successful economy? You've got labor, you've got capital, you've got intellectual property, you've got educational resources. Energy is one of those basic inputs that you need, not only for economic health, but for personal health. And so if you think about that, if energy is so important for the economy and for you, for life, then you need to make it an element of national security. And I will tell you this, there is no rich country that's energy poor.
Right.
And so if we want to be an economically healthy country, we need to have a lot of energy, and we need to be energy secure.
One of the things I noted in your slides was the importance of natural gas for energy generation in Texas. It's still kind of the leading source. But obviously, there's a lot of concern in the news, recent events about the energy security from abroad and the spike in gas prices. I mean, is Texas uniquely positioned to deal with those kinds of price shocks, or especially with natural gas?
I think, yes, in Texas, we are in a unique position because we've got an abundance of natural gas. We're actually largest LNG producer in the world. Yeah, I mean, even we were ahead of Qatar, but before their facilities got bombed. But yeah, I think that puts us in a unique position to be able to power not only our own state, but the other parts of the country and the rest of the world as well.
In line with the energy security idea, right? I know that we have a lot of these AI data centers moving into the state. They're different in lots of ways than industrial consumers of electricity, right?
Right.
So how is ERCOT thinking about, or you or ERCOT, you're not speaking for ERCOT, I understand, but how is Bill Flores thinking about, is that going to change how we think about the security of the grid when you have a lot of these data centers? Is there something intrinsic about that that changes how we think about energy security?
I don't know that it affects how we think about energy security. I do know that we think about how it affects grid stability. The load from a data center behaves differently than the load from a refinery or an LNG facility or something like that. And in particular, one of the things you have to worry, we talked about grid disturbances a minute ago. Some data centers are very sensitive about the quality of power they get, and they can wind up tripping offline quickly if the equipment in their power system detects an anomaly. It can trip off. Well, that creates its own grid disturbance. And so in Virginia, they had about 2 gigawatts of data centers trip offline just like that.
Wow.
And so if you think about it, all of a sudden, it's like somebody pushed on the gas for you because you've got all this excess power available because the load dropped off. And it's hard to manage that. So they behave differently because they're much more sensitive to power quality. Industrial facilities, on the other hand, in general, I'm being very journalistic here, tend to have a little bit more tolerance for grid disturbances than data centers. So yeah, when you look at the grid, you have to look at what are the stability requirements that are needed for that load, but at the same time, what do we need? How do we need that load to behave if it has a hiccup?
Yep.
And so that's one of the things we're going through this big process called voltage ride-through. How does your facility, whether you're a generator or a load, how do you respond to a grid disturbance? Even transmission companies, how do you respond to a load disturbance? If y'all want to know more about what could happen to something like this, pull out your AI engine and look up Odessa disturbance 1 and 2, and it'll tell you about a little bit. Or look at Spain; those were grid disturbances that cascaded. And so, if you are adding a 100 megawatt data center, you need to make sure that you know what happens if it drops offline like that, because they can pop offline. And so you need to design the stability analysis helps you design the grid so that you can tolerate those things.
I feel like I should come clean. The question about the energy and the gas security came from the online questions that were Googled in, so I just wanted to give the audience credit for that we are listening to those. I do have
that
one.
Was shout out to Google, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. One of the questions, exactly. One of the other questions that we had was, your presentation's so thorough, and I've seen you speak before, and it's very thorough and very informative.
Yeah, I liked when you and I were on the stage in San Antonio in January, basically parroting each other one after another.
A difficult act to follow. It was very difficult to follow him. I was not envying that position. But I'm curious about what you would think. We're here at the Bush School, where research is obviously a critical part of what we're doing at the University of Texas A&M. What things should we be working on as researchers? Like, what are those questions that we still don't know the answers to? How can we help from a research side?
Well, we need more electrical engineers, for sure. And, we've got a great engineering school that produces that. The engineering school at A&M also has a twin of the ERCOT system, so it can model the behavior of the ERCOT grid under different circumstances. So we need to make sure that twin, if you will, is kept up to speed with all the changes that are happening in the ERCOT system. And so the ERCOT system is actually moving faster than the ability to research, I think. Yeah. So no offense to anybody that's in the engineering school here, but I think it's just moving so fast that we need to be able to find ways to model changes to the grid more quickly and say, oh, you better watch out, you may have a problem here. Also, I think where the university can really lead is the integration of grid design and grid management with AI. And so I'd love to see the university be a leader in that. And then when you kind of put it into a Bush School perspective, you're going to have policy questions come out of that. And what are the policy issues that come with integrating AI with the grid or with AI with anything? And so I think that's where the Bush School can lean in on this. in terms of how do you address the policy challenges that come up when you add AI into everything that's happening?
Outstanding. Well, we're doing our best.
I know you
We're
are.
doing our best to meet those
Yeah.
challenges. I wish we could talk for another hour, but we're
Me too.
actually right out of time. I wanted to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and please join me in a warm applause for our
Thank you.
Really outstanding. Thank you. It was really great. I hope you all drive safe and have lots of power throughout the rest of the year. Thank you very much for coming.
And if I could say something, y'all remember, this is a great country. We've got our challenges, and we've got people overseas in harm's way. So keep them in your prayers, keep the country in your prayers, keep our first responders in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you.